The mop was still wet when she handed it to me. That is the detail I keep returning to even now. Not the look on her face, that particular smile that never quite reached her eyes, the one I would come to know the way you know bad weather before it arrives. Not the way my son Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway and said nothing. Not even the fact that I had been in their house for less than 40 minutes, still wearing the same blouse I had traveled in, my small suitcase sitting unopened by the front door where I had left it when she offered to show me around. It was the mop. Wet. Like she had been waiting. My name is Lorraine Celestine Thibodaux. I am 67 years old. I was born in New Orleans, raised in Baton Rouge, and I have spent the last 31 years building something from nothing in a city that did not always believe women like me were capable of building anything at all. I have sat across boardroom tables from men who looked at my hands before they looked at my face, who addressed their questions to whoever stood beside me, who revised their expressions only when the contracts were already signed and the numbers were already undeniable. I know how to be underestimated. I have made a life out of it. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is a habit of mine. My late husband Raymond used to say I told stories the way I laid foundations. From the bottom up, everything load-bearing before anything visible. He meant it as a compliment. He usually did. Let me start where it actually started. Not with the mop. Not even with the phone call from Marcus that came 3 weeks before I arrived on his doorstep with my suitcase and my silence, and all the things I had already decided not to say. Let me start with Raymond. Megaphone if this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. Raymond Thibodaux died on a Tuesday morning in March 6 years ago, while I was in a site meeting 40 minutes away. He was 64 years old and he had been managing the administrative side of Thibodaux Construction and Property Development for 22 of those years, which meant he died doing what he loved, which was keeping the books for the thing I had built. The doctors said it was his heart. I said it was because he worked too hard, loved too completely, and laughed too loud, and that any heart asked to contain that much would eventually have to make a choice about what to let go. We had started the company together. That is the part people forget, or the part they never knew depending on when they entered our story. In the beginning it was just the two of us and a second-hand truck and a contractor's license I had studied 3 years to earn while working days as a draftsman's assistant and nights doing the books for a tile company on the east side of the city. Raymond was the one who believed before the proof existed. I was the one who made the proof. By the time he died, Thibodaux Construction and Property Development had completed 47 residential projects, held deeds on 12 commercial properties, managed a portfolio of rental units spread across 4 parishes, and employed 131 people, not counting subcontractors. We had built custom homes, apartment complexes, a medical office park, and 1 elementary school that still has my name on a small bronze plaque near the entrance, though I made them put it somewhere modest. I do not tell you this to impress you. I tell you this because it is necessary context for everything that came after. You cannot understand the mop without understanding what I had built. You cannot understand what I chose to do without understanding what I was capable of and had chosen, for reasons that were my own and considered and deliberate, not to display. After Raymond died, I made some changes. Not to the company. The company continued under my leadership and the oversight of my general manager, a woman named Delia Arsenault who had been with us for 15 years, and who understood exactly how I like things run. The changes I made were personal. I stepped back from the public face of the work. I stopped attending ribbon cuttings. I let Delia represent us at industry events. I removed myself from the company website. I had always been a private person by nature, and Raymond's death had made me more so. This was not grief performing itself as withdrawal. This was a considered decision by a woman who had spent 30 years making sure her name was on things, and who now found herself asking for the first time whether she wanted to spend the next chapter of her life being seen. The answer, it turned out, was no. Not invisible. Just private. There is a difference, though most people cannot see it. My son Marcus knew the broad shape of what I had built. He had grown up watching me work, had spent summers in the site offices when he was young, had attended the company anniversary dinner when he was 17 and sat beside his father and seemed proud. But Marcus had always been more interested in his own direction than in mine, which I respected. He went to college in Atlanta, stayed there, worked in financial consulting, made a comfortable life. We spoke regularly. We were close in the way that parents and adult children can be close when geography creates a certain useful distance, warm, consistent, not daily. He met Vanessa at a colleague's wedding 4 years ago. He brought her to meet me that following Christmas, and I watched her the way I watch everything, carefully without showing that I was watching. She was beautiful in a very deliberate way, the kind of beautiful that takes considerable effort and calls attention to the effort. She had a smile for every situation, and a different register of voice depending on who she was speaking to. With Marcus she was soft and adoring. With his friends she was bright and social. With me she was polite in the precise, hollow way of someone who has decided that politeness is sufficient and that anything warmer would be a gift not owed. I did not dislike her immediately. I am not a person who makes immediate judgments. But I noted what I noted the way I always did, and I kept it. They married 2 years ago. I attended the wedding, sat in the front row, wore a dress the color of champagne that Raymond would have loved, and I smiled until my face ached because my son was happy, and that was the only thing that mattered in that room on that day. I gave them a gift that I had been planning for over a year. I did not wrap it. I simply arranged for the title of the property at 4412, Willowmere Drive to be transferred into Marcus's name, free and clear. No mortgage, no liens. The house at 4412, Willowmere Drive was a 4-bedroom colonial that Thibodaux Construction had built 7 years ago, as part of a residential development we called Willowmere Estates. We had sold most of the units in that development, but I had held on to 4 of them as rental properties, and this particular house, the one on the corner with the deep backyard and the wraparound porch and the kitchen, I had personally specified to have better light than the original plans allowed. This one I had always thought of as the one I might give Marcus someday. I gave it to him on his wedding day. He cried. He said, "Mama, you didn't have to do this." I said, "I know. That's why I did it." Vanessa said, "Oh, it's gorgeous." She was looking at the rendering photos I had included with the paperwork, not at me. I noted that too. For the 2 years after the wedding I continued my life as I had constructed it. Quietly, productively, on my own terms. I had a house of my own in Baton Rouge, the house Raymond and I had lived in for 18 years, and I filled it with my routines and my work and my friends and the particular peace that comes when you have spent decades building things and can finally simply inhabit them. Then 6 months ago I fell. Not badly. A twisted ankle on the back steps, nothing broken, nothing damaged except my confidence in my body's reliability, and temporarily my ability to drive. My doctor recommended I stay off the ankle for 6 weeks, and suggested it might be worth having someone nearby during that period. I was 67 years old and alone in a house and briefly less mobile than usual, and apparently this was sufficient information for my son to decide that I should come and stay with him and Vanessa while I recovered. I want to be clear about something. I did not need to go. I had options. I had Delia, who would have happily arranged whatever I needed. I had my neighbor Beverly, who had been my friend for 20 years and who had keys to my house and a standing invitation to use them. I had money, which is its own kind of independence, and I had the clear-eyed knowledge that a 6-week recovery from a twisted ankle was not an emergency requiring relocation. But Marcus called and he sounded so genuinely worried and so genuinely hopeful, and he said, "Mama, please let us take care of you for once." And something in me that was tired in a way I had not let myself acknowledge wanted to believe that this was what it would be. Let someone take care of you, Lorraine. Just for 6 weeks. Just let someone else carry something for a while. I packed a suitcase. I arranged for Delia to handle everything that needed handling. I told Beverly I'd be back in 6 weeks. I drove to Atlanta, my ankle was fine for driving, the doctor had been overcautious, and I arrived at 4412 Willowmere Drive on a Friday afternoon in October, which is the month I built that house, which is the month the leaves in the backyard turned the particular shade of amber I had imagined when I chose the placement of that wraparound porch. Marcus opened the door. He hugged me the way he had hugged me since he was a boy, too long, both arms face pressed to my shoulder. I felt the tension in him that he was trying not to show me, the particular tightness of someone who has been managing 2 realities at once and is not entirely sure how today will go. I noted that. Vanessa appeared behind him. She was wearing clothes that managed to look both casual and expensive, and her hair was perfect, and her smile was the version she used with me. Polished, adequate, not warm. "Lorraine," she said. "You made it. Come in. Not welcome. Not good to have you." come in like I was a package that had arrived at the expected time. I came in. The house looked different from when I had last seen it. They had furnished it well. Vanessa had good taste, I would give her that. And there were touches everywhere that spoke of money spent freely and a comfort with being comfortable. The kitchen I had specified for its light was filled with new appliances that gleamed. The living room had a large sectional sofa in a pale gray that was beautiful and impractical. The wraparound porch, my porch, had been furnished with outdoor pieces that would not survive more than 2 seasons in Georgia weather, but they looked lovely in the afternoon light. Marcus took my bag. Come on, Mama, let me show you your room. It was the smallest bedroom. I had designed this house with 4 bedrooms, 1 large primary, 1 guest room of generous proportions, and 2 smaller rooms that I had intended to be flexible. A study, a nursery, a sitting room depending on the family. The room Marcus led me to was the smaller of the 2 flexible rooms, with 1 window facing the side yard and a single bed that looked like it had been purchased recently and without much deliberation. This is perfect, I said. Because it was not worth saying anything else and because I was aware, with the particular awareness of someone who has spent a lifetime reading rooms, that the decision about which room to put me in had not been made by Marcus. I sat on the edge of the bed and Marcus said he'd let me get settled and that dinner would be in a couple of hours, and then I heard him and Vanessa speaking in low voices in the hallway, and then the sound of footsteps moving away, and then the house settled into one of its silences. I sat very still. I looked at the single window. I thought about the afternoon I had spent with the original architect's plans spread across my kitchen table, marking up the light specifications with a red pen, writing in the margins, more glass, east-facing, the morning matters. I thought about the day we poured the foundation for this house and I walked the perimeter in my work boots with the site foreman, checking the measurements, touching the forms, knowing this one was special. I thought about Raymond, who had come to the site on a Saturday afternoon and stood in the framed-out kitchen doorway and said, "Lorraine, you built something beautiful again." I thought about all of that and then I put it away the way I always put things away that were not useful in the immediate present, and I stood up and I opened my suitcase and I began to unpack. Dinner that evening was the first measure of what the 6 weeks would be. Vanessa had cooked, which I appreciated, and the food was good, which I acknowledged. We sat at the dining table, a beautiful piece, solid oak, which I recognized as coming from the architectural salvage place on Peachtree because I had been there myself once, years ago, looking for something for a client's home, and Marcus made conversation with the effortful brightness of a man attempting to hold 2 atmospheres steady at once. Vanessa answered questions with the minimum words necessary. She looked at Marcus when she spoke, rarely at me. When she did look at me, there was something in her eyes that I had seen before in various configurations throughout my life. In foremen who thought they knew more than they did, in bankers who looked at a black woman asking for a business loan and saw something other than what was actually in front of them, in neighbors who watched our company's signs go up on a new site and seemed puzzled that we were still there, still building, still undeniably present. It was the look of someone who has already decided what you are, and finds the evidence unnecessary. I ate my dinner. I asked Marcus about his work. I told Vanessa the roasted vegetables were excellent. I excused myself early, citing the travel and the ankle, and I went to the small room with the single window and I sat on the bed in the dark for a while, not sleeping, just thinking. The next morning was a Saturday. I woke early, as I always do. A lifetime of site schedules has made 5:30 feel like a reasonable hour, and I dressed and came to the kitchen intending to make coffee. The kitchen was empty. Vanessa was not yet up. Marcus was not yet up. The house was quiet in the way of houses that are still learning their occupants, still adjusting to the specific weight and rhythm of the people inside them. I knew this house. I had specified its floors, engineered hardwood in a pale ash color that I had chosen because it would show light rather than absorb it. I had specified its windows, double-hung, generously proportioned, positioned to capture the morning on the east side and the evening on the west. I had specified its kitchen layout, a galley configuration that opened to the breakfast nook, which opened to the porch, so that the person cooking was never cut off from the rest of the living space. I moved through it the way you move through something you built, which is to say I moved through it like I was reading something I had written and remembering what I had meant by each sentence. I made coffee. I took it to the porch. I sat in one of the impractical outdoor chairs and watched the backyard come into the morning. The backyard was the thing I was most proud of in this house. Not the kitchen I had specified for its light, not the proportions I had spent 3 weeks adjusting in the plans, Not even the wraparound porch where I was now sitting. The backyard. It was deep, nearly 120 feet from the back of the house to the rear property line. And I had worked with a landscape architect to design it with a central lawn flanked by planted beds and anchored at the rear by a line of mature specimen trees that I had sourced from a nursery that specialized in transplanting established trees rather than starting from saplings. Those trees were already 30 years old when we planted them. They were enormous now. They made the backyard feel like something that had always existed, something that had been there before the house, before us, something that would be there after. I sat with my coffee and the trees and the October morning, and for a brief interval I was simply a woman at peace in a beautiful space she had made. And nothing more complicated than that. Then Vanessa came outside. She was dressed and polished in a way that seemed deliberate for 8 on a Saturday morning. She had a cup of coffee of her own and she stood at the porch railing and looked at the yard with an expression of ownership that I recognized because I had worn it myself, though mine had been earned differently. "Lorraine," she said without looking at me. "I'm glad you're feeling better." "I'm feeling well," I said. "Thank you for having me." She turned then and looked at me, and the look was the one I had noted at dinner, the one I had been noting since Christmas 2 years ago, fully deployed now without the softening that Marcus's presence required. "While you're here," she said, "I want to make sure we're all comfortable. Marcus works long hours. I work long hours. We're not really set up to have a house guest in the way that needs a lot of management." "I understand," I said. She nodded. "So it would be helpful if you could contribute while you're here. Just keeping things tidy, helping with meals, that kind of thing." "Of course," I said. I would expect nothing less. Something shifted in her face. Not quite disappointment that I had agreed so easily, more like recalibration. She had been prepared for resistance and now had to adjust. "Good," she said. She set her coffee cup on the railing. "I'll show you where we keep the cleaning things." And that was how I found myself 40 minutes later, with a wet mop in my hands in the kitchen of a house I had built. She had shown me the supply closet off the laundry room whose placement I had specifically revised in the plans to make it accessible without being visible from the main living areas, a small domestic grace note that no one in this house knew I had made. She had explained the mop, which was one of those flat microfiber systems that require the pad to be pre-wetted, and she had gestured toward the kitchen floor and said something about the grout needing attention, and then she had gone upstairs, and I was left alone with the mop in the house and the morning light coming through the east-facing windows exactly as I had designed it to. I stood very still for a moment. There is a particular kind of stillness that is not passivity. It is the stillness of someone who has received information and is now processing it at a level too deep for immediate reaction. It is the stillness I have felt standing on an empty lot before I began a build, reading the land, understanding what it wanted to be. It is the stillness I felt when Raymond died and I sat in the hospital parking lot for 2 hours before I could make myself drive home. Not from grief alone but from the sheer weight of understanding what had just changed. I stood with the mop in my hands in the kitchen of the house I had built, and I was very still, and I thought several things. I thought, she does not know. I thought, Marcus did not tell her or told her something partial, some abbreviated version in which the house was simply a gift from his mother, a generous mother, a mother with some money set aside, without the specific and considerable context of what that money was and where it came from and how much of it there was. I thought, she has looked at me and seen an old woman, a burden, a house guest to be managed, something to be put in the small room with the single window and handed a wet mop on a Saturday morning. I thought, she has no idea. And then I thought the thing that mattered most, the thing that would govern the next several weeks, the thing I had to decide right then in that kitchen with the morning light doing exactly what I had intended it to do. What are you going to do about it, Lorraine? I had options. I always had options. I could have put the mop back in the closet and called my son downstairs and had a conversation about expectations and dignity, and what it meant to welcome a family member into your home. I could have called Delia and told her to start making arrangements for me to leave. I could have told Vanessa exactly who she was speaking to, right there in that kitchen, and watched her face rearrange itself. I did none of those things. I mopped the floor. Not because I was afraid of Vanessa. Not because I was uncertain of my position. Not because I had forgotten for even a moment what I had built and what it meant and what it was worth. I mopped the floor because I had spent 67 years learning that the most important decisions are never the ones made in the heat of first information. I mopped the floor because I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with before I decided how to respond to it. I mopped the floor because I had learned from 30 years of building things that you do not begin from the outside. You begin from the foundation. You build your case from the bottom up, load-bearing before visible. And because, if I was being fully honest with myself, the way Raymond had always made me be, the way I had tried to be ever since he left and took his particular gift for truth-telling with him, I mopped the floor because a small, careful part of me wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to see what Vanessa was made of. I wanted to understand the full extent of what my son had allowed to take root in the house I had given them. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I decided what to do about it. So I mopped. I mopped well. I moved the chairs from the kitchen table and I did the corners properly and I rinsed the pad twice and I put it all back where she had shown me it went. And when I was done, the grout was clean and the floor shone in the morning light, and I stood for a moment in the kitchen I had designed and looked at what I had made of it, and then I went and poured myself a second cup of coffee and took it back to the porch and sat with my trees. Marcus came downstairs around 9:30. He found me on the porch and he brought his own coffee and he sat in the other impractical chair and we talked about nothing of consequence. His work, a project he was managing, a restaurant he wanted to take me to while I was in town. He seemed lighter than the night before. Relieved maybe that the morning had passed without incident. That Vanessa and I had managed to coexist. He did not ask me what I had been doing. He did not notice the floor. "How are you feeling?" he asked, meaning the ankle. "Fine," I said. "Really, Marcus?" "I'm fine." He looked at me in the sideways way he had been doing since he was a teenager, the way that meant he wanted to say something and was deciding whether to. "She means well," he said. She's particular about the house. About how things run." "I understand," I said. And I did understand. That was the thing. I understood everything about this situation, in all of its layers, in ways that Vanessa could not begin to imagine. I said nothing else. I drank my coffee. I watched the trees. The first week established the pattern. Every morning Vanessa left a list. Not on paper, that would have been too explicit, too easy to point to later. She left it in the particular way of a woman who understood the power of the implied. She would mention casually in passing that the bathroom needed attention, or that the floors in the guest areas were looking dull, or that she'd been meaning to clean out the pantry but hadn't had time. And then she would leave, or Marcus would leave, or they would both leave, and I would be alone in the house with the implication. I am telling you, I did it. I did not do it because I believed I owed it. I did it because I had decided to observe, and observation requires presence, and presence in this household meant participation in the form Vanessa had established. But I observed. I observed the way Marcus looked at the counters when he came home in the evenings, checking them, I realized, not to see if they were clean but to see if Vanessa would have reason to be unhappy. I observed the way Vanessa spoke to me at mealtimes, which was very little and always through Marcus, as though addressing me directly was an intimacy she had not agreed to. I observed the way she handled the house, her house she called it, always her house, with the proprietary ease of someone who had never questioned her right to it. I observed my son. That is the hardest thing to tell you, because what I observed in Marcus was something a mother never wants to see and cannot pretend she hasn't seen once she has. He was diminished. Not broken, not yet, and not, I would come to understand, entirely without his own agency in the matter, but diminished in the specific way of a person who has slowly ceded territory they did not realize was essential until the ceding was already complete. He was kind to me always. He was attentive in the ways he had learned from me and from Raymond. But there was something behind his eyes when he looked at Vanessa that I could not name cleanly, and did not want to name hastily. Fear is too strong. Habit is too passive. It was something in between, the particular condition of a person who has learned that peace is available if they do not ask for too much, and who has decided somewhere along the way that the cost of that peace is acceptable. I had not raised him to find that acceptable. But I had also not been inside his marriage, and I had not been the one living it. And I was 67 years old and had learned enough about the distance between what we intend and what we enable to know that judgment was not mine to dispense. Not yet. The second week, Vanessa found a rhythm with me. This is what I mean, she grew comfortable. The first week she had been watchful, as people are when they are establishing new arrangements and waiting to see if they hold. By the second week she seemed satisfied that they held, and she grew comfortable, and comfort, in my experience, is when people begin to reveal themselves in ways that watchfulness conceals. On the Tuesday of the second week she had a friend over. I was in the kitchen when they arrived, I had been making a grocery list, a task that had somehow become mine, though no one had explicitly said so, and Vanessa brought her friend through with the tour that people give of houses they are proud of. The friend's name was Courtney. She was pretty and admiring and said the right things in the right places. Vanessa showed her the kitchen. She showed her the light, the light I had written in the margins of the plans, and said, "I just love how bright it is in here. We really lucked out with this house." "We really did," Courtney agreed. "Marcus's mother gave it to them," Vanessa said, in the tone of someone explaining something that requires a certain amount of charitable interpretation. "As a wedding gift." "Oh, that's so generous," Courtney said. "She's staying with us for a few weeks," Vanessa said. "Her ankle." She said it the way you say a piece of furniture is in for repairs. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my grocery list. Neither of them addressed me or acknowledged my presence in any manner that suggested I was a person who could hear them. I kept writing my grocery list. That was the Tuesday of the second week. On the Thursday of the second week, something else happened. Vanessa was on the phone in the living room, a work call from the sound of it, something about a project she was overseeing, and I passed through to get to the porch. She did not lower her voice. Why would she? I was not a person to be considered in that way. I heard enough. The call was with someone who worked in property management from what I could gather. There was a dispute about a maintenance request at one of the Willowmere Estates properties. Not our house, a different unit in the same development, a rental unit. The issue was a water heater. The property management company, a firm I knew, had worked with, had contracted with in fact for several of these very units, was apparently being unresponsive, and Vanessa was frustrated. "We live in Willowmere Estates," she was saying. "We own here. I know other owners who have the same issue with this management company. Who even owns this development? Does anyone know who we can escalate to?" I walked past her to the porch. I sat down in the impractical chair. I looked at my trees. And for the first time since I had arrived at this house with my suitcase and my silence and my ankle that did not actually need 6 weeks of recovery to be fine, I felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite satisfaction but lived in the territory between them, in that quiet space where complicated truths settle before they become decisions. She did not know. She did not know that the management company she was frustrated with reported directly to Delia Arsenault, who reported directly to me. She did not know that the water heater at the rental unit 2 streets over was a maintenance issue I could resolve with a single phone call. She did not know that the development she called Willowmere Estates was a project I had conceived and financed and built and partially retained, and that 4 of the units in it, including the house she was standing in, were mine until the day I signed them over to my son. She did not know that the house she took tours of and called her house and described with the quiet proprietary pride of someone who had earned something was a house I had built from the ground. She had handed me a wet mop. She had left me grocery lists. She had talked around me in my own kitchen like I was a piece of furniture in for repairs. And she did not know. I sat with my trees and the October light and everything I had spent 31 years building, and I thought about Raymond, who had always said I told stories from the bottom up, load-bearing before visible. He was right. He was usually right. I had the foundation. I had all of it. I had been patient for 2 weeks and I had watched and I had learned the shape of what I was dealing with. Now I needed to decide what to build. I reached for my phone. Not to call Delia, not yet. Not to call my attorney, Gerald Fontenot, who had been handling Thibodaux business for 15 years, and who would have my answer ready before I finished the question. Not to call Beverly back home, who would have laughed herself sideways and said, "Lorraine, you are letting this go on far too long for a woman with your resources." Called no one. I held the phone in my hand and I looked at the trees, my trees, the 30-year-old specimen trees I had sourced from a nursery that specialized in giving old things new places to grow, and I thought about the right order for what came next. You do not begin from the outside. You begin from the foundation. I began. The first thing I did was quiet and invisible, as all foundations are. I called Delia that evening from the small room with the single window, the door closed, my voice low. She answered on the second ring as she always did. "Delia," I said. "Lorraine, how's the ankle?" "The ankle's fine. It was always fine. I need you to pull the Willowmere files." "All of them?" "All of them," I said. "And get me a meeting with Gerald next week." "Not here. Baton Rouge or over the phone." She paused. She had worked with me long enough to know that when I said this combination of things in this particular tone, something deliberate was in motion. Should I ask? She said. Not yet, I said. She said, yes, ma'am, the way she always did when she understood that understanding would come in its own time. I ended the call. I sat in the small room. Through the single window I could see the side yard, which I had specified to have a particular variety of creeping fig on the fence line, and which was still green in October in this part of Georgia. I had built this house. Every specification, every revision, every load-bearing decision that held the visible things in place. I had built it and I had given it to my son on the day he married a woman who would, 6 weeks later, hand his mother a wet mop and schedule her like a service call. I was not angry. Anger is a fire, and fire is for things you want to destroy. I did not want to destroy anything. I wanted to build something. I had always wanted to build something. I just had not yet decided exactly what. But I was beginning. From the foundation up. Load-bearing before visible. I put my phone on the bedside table. I turned off the light. I lay in the dark of the small room with the single window in the house I had made, and I listened to the sounds of it settling around me, the particular creaks and breath of a well-built structure finding its rest for the night, and I knew, the way I have always known things about the buildings I have made, exactly what this house was capable of. 2029 Claude responded. The meeting with Gerald happened on a Thursday over the phone, while Vanessa was at work and Marcus was in a client meeting that would run until evening. The meeting with Gerald happened on a Thursday over the phone, while Vanessa was at work and Marcus was in a client meeting that would run until evening. I sat in the small room with the door closed and my notepad on my knee, the same yellow legal pad I had been using for 30 years, the same kind Raymond used to tease me about because I refused to switch to anything digital for the thinking work. Screens are for showing, he used to say, imitating me badly. Paper is for knowing. He was right that I said it. He was also right that it was true. Gerald Fontenot had been my attorney since the early days of the company. When I needed someone who could read a contract faster than the other side expected, and find the 3 things in it that mattered before anyone else had gotten past the preamble. He was 71 now, semi-retired, which in practice meant he only worked with clients he had chosen to keep and answered his phone before the second ring. He had known Raymond. He had been at the funeral. He was, in the particular way of professional relationships that accumulate enough time and history to become something else, a person I trusted. Lorraine, he said, when I had explained what I needed. Just so I'm clear on what you're asking. I'm not asking anything yet, I said. I'm inquiring about what I have. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone reviewing a well-organized internal file. Then he said, you have considerably more than most people understand. That's what I thought, I said. Tell me the specifics. He told me. The house at 4412, Willowmere Drive had been transferred to Marcus cleanly and completely as a wedding gift. There was nothing to revisit there, nor did I intend to. What I owned was everything else. The 3 remaining retained units in the Willowmere Estates development, which were rental properties managed under Thibodaux' umbrella and generating consistent income. The commercial properties in 4 parishes. The undeveloped land parcels I had been quietly acquiring for the past 8 years in areas I believed would become desirable within the next decade, because I had spent 30 years learning how to read where cities were going before they got there. The company itself, which remained wholly mine, structured as I had structured it, with Delia as general manager and my name on everything that mattered. And then Gerald said the thing I had asked him to look into specifically. The Willowmere HOA, he said. You're on the founding documents as the original developer. The covenant structure gives the original developer's entity certain retained rights, including approval authority over significant exterior modifications, access easements, and, here it is, first right of consultation on any major property management decisions affecting units within the development. I knew that, I said. I know you know that, Gerald said. I'm saying it out loud so you can hear it in context. I appreciated that about him. He understood that sometimes you need to hear the architecture of a thing spoken plainly before you decide how to use it. The management company, he continued. The one currently contracted to manage the rental units. That contract is up for renewal in 60 days. I know, I said. And the company name on the founding HOA documents, he said, is Thibodaux Construction and Property Development. Which is mine, I said. Which is yours, he confirmed. We were quiet for a moment. Then Gerald said, Lorraine, what are you building? I said, I don't know yet. But I know what materials I have. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. Raymond used to make that sound, I thought. The sound of a man who has known you long enough to appreciate the way you think. Call me when you're ready, he said. I will, I said. I put the phone down and sat with my yellow legal pad and wrote nothing on it for a long time. Sometimes the thinking happens before the writing. Sometimes you have to let the foundation cure before you put weight on it. The third week. I want to tell you about the third week carefully because the third week is when I stopped simply observing and started doing the thing that would matter later. Not acting, not yet. Understanding. There is a difference that most people miss, and missing it is how most people make their first mistake. Vanessa's world, I had come to understand, was organized around a set of beliefs that were invisible to her because she had never had reason to examine them. She believed that houses like this one were the natural reward of ambition and effort, hers and Marcus's, the specific ambition and effort of people who had gone to the right schools and chosen the right careers and presented themselves in the right ways. She believed that gifts from parents were nice but not the same as earning, and that the house, while technically given, had been absorbed into the category of things they had created because they deserved them. She believed that older women who were not currently employed were a particular kind of person, limited in scope, grateful for management, best handled with a clear structure and minimal sentimentality. She believed all of this without cruelty. That was the complicated part, the part one kept returning to because it would have been simpler if it were cruelty. It was not cruelty. It was the particular confidence of someone who had never looked at a woman like me and seen anything that required revision of their understanding. She handed me that mop the way you hand someone a mop. Not to humiliate. Simply because in her architecture of the world, that was what the situation called for. Which was its own kind of problem and in some ways a deeper one. On the Monday of the third week, something happened that clarified several things at once. I was in the kitchen, my kitchen, a sentence I allowed myself only in the privacy of my own mind, preparing lunch because preparing lunch had become one of my functions in this household, and I had decided to do it well because if you are going to do something you do it well, that is simply the kind of person I am. When I heard Vanessa on the phone in the hallway. She was talking to her mother. I knew this because she called her mama in a tone she used with no one else, a softer and more unguarded version of herself that appeared only in these calls, and which I had overheard enough of to understand that her mother was the one person whose opinion fully reached her. They've been talking about the property management situation at the HOA meeting, Vanessa was saying. Apparently the management company is owned by some developer who built the whole development and still has a stake in it somehow, but nobody really knows the details. So complicated, these old arrangements. I'm thinking about reaching out to see if we can get a different company in. She paused, listening. No, Marcus doesn't really know either. His mother gave us the house, so technically it was all through her side, but she's never mentioned any of it. I don't even know if she fully understood what she was giving us. She paused again. She's here actually. Staying with us while her ankle heals. She's fine. She helps out around the house, which is good because Marcus and I are both so busy. Another pause. No, Mama. She's fine. She's just, she's older. She's not really, she's just here. She's just here. I was standing at the kitchen counter with a knife in my hand and a cutting board in front of me and a bell pepper I had been about to slice, and I was very still. She's just here. I thought about the site meeting where I had driven 40 minutes to review foundation work while Raymond was dying. I thought about the bank that had denied my first business loan and the second one and approved the third one only after I had restructured my application 3 times and brought Raymond with me as though his presence were a credential my work was not. I thought about the ribbon cutting for the elementary school where I had stood in the background while the principal thanked the construction crew without mentioning the woman who had designed the contingency schedule that kept the project from going 6 months over. I thought about 31 years of being present in rooms that found me invisible until the numbers were undeniable. She's just here. I set the knife down. Picked it back up. I sliced the bell pepper in the clean, even cuts that my mother had taught me when I was 9 years old, because my mother believed that every task worth doing was worth doing with precision. Then I finished making lunch. When Vanessa came into the kitchen, she looked at the counter and then at me with the expression of mild approval she had adopted over the first 2 weeks. The expression that said, "You are functioning as expected." "That smells good," she said. "Thank you," I said. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter and looked at her phone, and I looked at her for a moment. Really looked, the way I had not permitted myself to do in the full and comprehensive way I was capable of, and I thought, she is not a bad person. She is a person who has not been required to look carefully at anything she did not choose to look at. And that is a specific kind of problem that only one thing can solve. Evidence. Not argument. Not confrontation. Not the kind of conversation that requires the other person to voluntarily revise their understanding, because that kind of conversation rarely produces the revision it intends. Evidence. The kind that simply exists, that does not ask permission to be believed, that makes revision unavoidable. I had evidence. I had 31 years of it. The question was simply when and how. That afternoon I called Delia again. I need the architectural drawings for 4412 Willowmere, I said. The originals. Whatever we have in the archive. She didn't ask why. She said she'd have them scanned and sent by end of day. I also want the site photographs, I said. The whole build sequence. She said she'd find them. And the original specification documents, I said. The ones with my handwritten notes. Lorraine, she said slowly, in the tone of someone assembling a picture from pieces. Are you planning a presentation? Not yet, I said. I'm planning a foundation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how's the ankle? The ankle is fine, I said. It was always fine. I know, she said gently. I know it was. We understood each other, Delia and I. We had been working together long enough for the words to carry more than the words. That evening Marcus came home earlier than usual. Something in his day had resolved ahead of schedule, and he found me on the porch with my legal pad, writing. He stood in the doorway for a moment before he came out, and I had the sense, without looking up, that he was studying me in a way he had not permitted himself since I arrived. I let him look. I kept writing. Mama, he said finally, and he came and sat in the other chair. Marcus, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside in the yard the trees were losing their October color now, the amber deepening to something darker, the leaves beginning to release. She works hard, he said. Vanessa, I just want you to understand that. She's not. She doesn't mean anything by it when she's a certain way. She just has a lot going on. I understand, I said. I just don't want you to feel. He stopped. Feel what? I said. He rubbed his hand across his face. He had Raymond's hands. I had noticed this 1,000 times and it still caught me. I don't want you to feel like a guest, he said. In a house that came from you. I looked at him then. I set my legal pad down and I looked at my son, who was 51 years old and had his father's hands and his father's way of arriving at the truth sideways, through the back of the thing rather than the front, because the front felt too exposed. Marcus, I said. I do not feel like a guest. He looked at me. I feel like your mother, I said. Which is what I am. Everything else is detail. He looked away. Out at the yard. The trees. I know you see things, he said. You've always seen things. I have, I said. Are you going to do anything about it? I looked at the trees. The 30-year-old trees I had placed there specifically, sourced from a nursery that understood that old things transplanted carefully could grow more beautifully in new soil than anything started from scratch. I'm doing what I always do, I said. I'm building something. I just haven't decided what yet. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, quietly, in the voice he used when he was being most himself, Don't burn it down, Mama. Whatever you decide. I reached over and put my hand on his. Raymond used to say the same thing, I told him. And I never have. He turned his hand over and held mine for a moment. Just a moment. Then he went inside to find his wife and I stayed with my trees, and the sky above the backyard went from amber to copper to the particular deep blue that comes just before dark, the color I had always thought was the most honest color, the one that doesn't pretend the day is still going or that the night is fully here. The 4th week was when things began to shift, though not in the way I had planned, because the best building projects never go exactly as planned. That is not failure. That is material. The shift came from an unexpected direction. The Willowmere HOA. There had apparently been a meeting scheduled, a quarterly owners' meeting, the kind of administrative gathering that happens in residential developments, and is attended by whoever has the energy and the grievance. And a notice had been left in the mailbox at 4412 Willowmere Drive. Vanessa found it on a Tuesday morning and brought it to the breakfast table with the expression of someone who has found an interesting item. There's an HOA meeting Thursday, she said to Marcus. About the property management situation. Apparently there's some question about the current contract. Marcus looked up from his coffee. Is that the water heater thing? And other stuff, she said. Apparently the management company has some kind of special relationship with the original developer and it's creating complications. People want to bring in someone new. She said this without looking at me. I was at the kitchen counter pouring my second cup of coffee, and I was a piece of furniture in for repairs, and she did not look at me. Do you want to go? Marcus asked. I think someone should, she said. We're owners. We should have a voice. Marcus glanced at me. Just briefly. A glance that said, I know what you know and I don't know what to do about it. I said nothing. I poured my coffee and went to the porch. Megaphone, if this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. That evening I called Delia again. The HOA meeting Thursday, I said. I know about it, she said. The management contract question. I'm aware, I said. What's your read on it? She paused in the careful way of someone who has been thinking about a thing for longer than the question implies. Lorraine, some of the owners are genuinely frustrated. The water heater issue, the response times. Some of it is fair criticism. Is it performance or is it personnel? I asked. Mostly personnel, she said. The site manager they've had over there has been underperforming. I was already planning to address it. Address it before Thursday, I said. She was quiet. Then you want them to see a resolution. I want them to see who's actually paying attention, I said. Yes, ma'am, she said. I ended the call and sat with my legal pad and wrote several things. Not instructions. I did not need to write instructions, Delia understood the work. I wrote something else. I wrote, in the careful handwriting my mother had insisted on, the specific sequence of what was about to become visible after a long time of being present below the surface. Load-bearing first, then visible. I had been building the foundation for 4 weeks. I was nearly ready for the structure. On Wednesday evening, the day before the HOA meeting, Vanessa had a conversation with Marcus that I heard from the hallway, not because I was listening, because I was passing through, and because the house I had built carried sound in ways that its current occupants had not thought to account for. I'm just going to ask some pointed questions at the meeting, Vanessa was saying, about who actually controls the management contract and whether the HOA has any real authority over it. Someone needs to push back. Marcus said something I couldn't hear. I'm serious, she said. We own here. We have a right to know who's making decisions about our property. I moved away from the hallway. I sat in the small room. I looked at the single window. Our property. The words settled in the quiet of the room like sediment settling to the bottom of still water. Slowly, without drama, finding their permanent lair. I had given this house to my son. I had signed the papers and transferred the deed and considered it done with love and without conditions, because that is what I meant when I gave it. Our property. That was correct. It was correct and it was appropriate and it was what I had intended. What I had not intended was to become, within the walls of that property, invisible. To become the woman who mopped the floors and wrote the grocery lists and was talked around in the kitchen and described to mothers in other cities as just here. That I had not intended. And that was the thing I was now, carefully and with full consideration, preparing to address. Not by taking back. I want to be very clear about that because it matters. I was not building toward reclamation. I was not interested in punishment, despite what the simplest version of this story might suggest. I had not spent 31 years in this business by reaching for the simplest version of things. I was building toward something more precise and more lasting than punishment. I was building toward clarity. Thursday morning. I was up at 5:30 as usual. I made coffee. I took it to the porch. The trees in the backyard were different now from the trees I had first sat with a month ago. Further into their seasonal release, more bare, the structure of them more visible without the leaves, which is a thing I have always loved about trees in November. They show you the architecture. At 8:15, Delia sent me a message. Water heater at Unit 8 replaced and tested yesterday afternoon. New site manager on site starting Monday. I've sent a letter to all Willowmere owners on Thibodaux letterhead, acknowledging the service delays and outlining the corrective actions. Went out yesterday evening. I read this twice. Then I wrote back, good work. She wrote back, always. I put my phone in my pocket and drank my coffee and thought about what was going to happen at that HOA meeting. Vanessa would arrive. She would have her questions prepared. She would have the particular readiness of someone who has decided to use a public setting to establish their standing and demonstrate their engagement, and who has chosen their moment carefully. She would ask about the management contract and the developer's retained rights, and whether the HOA had authority over what company they used. And someone would show her the letter from Thibodaux Construction and Property Development, which had arrived in every owner's mailbox the previous evening, which addressed the concerns directly and efficiently and which bore, in the signature line, the name Lorraine C. Thibodaux, Principal. Or perhaps no one would show her the letter at the meeting. Perhaps she would come home and mention the meeting to Marcus, and Marcus would remember the name from the wedding gift paperwork, or perhaps he wouldn't, and either way she would eventually see the letter herself because it had gone to their address too, to 4412 Willowmere Drive, to the owners of record. I had not planned the timing precisely. I had simply done what I always did, made sure the foundation was sound and let the structure find its own moment to become visible. But I had not expected what actually happened. What actually happened was that Marcus came to find me on the porch at 9 in the morning, an hour after Vanessa had left for the HOA meeting, and he was holding an envelope. "Mama," he said. His voice was very quiet. I looked at the envelope. I already knew what it was, but I let him show me. "This came yesterday," he said. "I didn't see it until this morning." He held it out and I took it, though I had no need to read it. The Thibodaux letterhead. Delia's clean formatting. My name in the signature line. Marcus sat down in the other chair without being invited. He looked at the trees for a long moment. "You own the management company," he said. Not as a question. "I own the company that contracted the management firm," I said. "And I'm the original developer of this entire development." He was quiet. "The HOA founding documents," I said. "My company's name is on them." He was quiet for longer. "Vanessa's at that meeting right now," he said. "She's going to ask questions." "I know," I said. "And she's going to find out," he said. "She's going to find out some of it," I said. "The part that's on the letterhead." He looked at me then, and his face had the expression of a man who is understanding several things at once and trying to find the right order for them. He looked for a moment very young. He looked the way he had looked when he was 12 years old and had done something he was not certain was wrong but that he was certain I could see. "How much is there?" he said. "That she doesn't know." I looked at my trees. "Marcus," I said, "what do you know about what I built?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know it was a construction company. I know it was successful. I know you and Dad worked very hard." I nodded. "That's true. What else?" He shook his head slowly. I said, "Have you ever looked up Thibodaux Construction and Property Development?" He was quiet in a way that was its own answer. "I've been thinking about why you didn't," I said. "And I don't think it was in curiosity. I think it was something else." He rubbed his face with Raymond's hands. "You never talked about it," he said. "Not in numbers. Not in specifics. You always just said the business is fine." "That's true," I said. "I did." "Why?" he said. And there was something in that question, not accusation, not exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that needed to be heard and answered rather than redirected. I thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because I was your mother before I was a businesswoman," I said. "And I wanted you to know me as your mother, not as a set of numbers." He nodded slowly. "And," I said, "because I was aware from the time you were young that money changes how people see you, and I wanted the people in your life to see you first, not what you might inherit." He was quiet for a long time. "I should have told you more," I said. "That's on me. I'm telling you now." He looked at me. Really looked, the way he had been working up to since I arrived. "Tell me," he said. So I told him. I told him about the 47 residential projects, the 12 commercial properties, the rental portfolio. I told him about the undeveloped land parcels I had been accumulating for 8 years. I told him about the company structure and Delia's role and Gerald Fontenot in the 31 years of it. I told him about the elementary school with the modest bronze plaque. I told him about the Willowmere development and why I had held on to 4 units and which one I had always thought might be his. I told him about the morning I had poured the foundation of this house and walked the perimeter in my work boots and known it was the one. He listened. He did not say anything for a long time after I finished. We sat together on the porch in the November morning, both of us looking at the trees, and the light moved across the yard the way I had designed it to move, East to west, warm and generous. Then he said, Mama, that's why are you mopping floors? I looked at him. Because someone handed me a mop, I said. He understood. I could see him understanding, the full weight of it arriving and settling. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was low and he was not performing sorrow. He was simply in it. You don't need to apologize for what she did, I said. I need to apologize for what I didn't do, he said. That was Marcus. That had always been Marcus, arriving at the precise center of the thing, once he let himself get there. We sat with that for a moment. What do you want to happen? He said. When she comes home. I want a conversation, I said. Honest and complete. Between you and her first. Whatever she found out at that meeting or didn't find out. I want her to understand what she's been. I paused, choosing. What she's been operating without knowing. And then? He said. And then we'll see what she's made of, I said. He nodded. And me? He said. What about what I've been operating without knowing? I reached over and put my hand on his arm. You're my son, I said. That part is not complicated. He put his hand over mine. We sat together for a while longer. The trees. The light. The November yard. Then his phone rang and he went inside to answer it, and I sat alone on the porch and waited for what was building itself toward visible. Vanessa came home at noon. I heard the front door. I heard her set her bag down in the hallway, the particular sound of it, the way she always dropped it on the same tile. I heard her call Marcus's name. I heard him come from the kitchen where he had been, for the past hour, in the kind of quiet that is actually the loudest kind. I stayed on the porch. I could not hear what they were saying at first. I did not try to. I was not gathering evidence anymore. That phase was complete. What happened in that house in the next hour was between my son and his wife, and I had been clear with myself about the boundary of my involvement. But the house I had built carried sound in ways its occupants had not thought to account for, and after a while their voices grew and I could hear. What do you mean it's her company? Vanessa was saying. Marcus said something lower that I couldn't catch. Thibodaux Construction is her company? Yes, Marcus said. Clearly now. A silence. She built that whole development? Yes. A longer silence. And she owns. Her voice had changed. I noticed it even through the wall of the house I had built. She owns the management company we've been trying to get answers from? She doesn't own it directly. She contracts them. But she's the one. Vanessa stopped. She's the one who could have fixed the water heater issue with a phone call, Marcus said. A very long silence. When were you going to tell me this? Vanessa said. Her voice was different now. Something had left it. I found out this morning, Marcus said. You didn't know? I knew she had a company, he said. I didn't know the scope of it. She's private. She doesn't talk about it. She's been mopping our floors, Vanessa said. Those 4 words landed in the air of my kitchen and my living room and my porch and my yard and my trees, and I sat with them in the November morning, and I was very still. She's been mopping our floors. I want to tell you something about that moment, about the particular quality of it. It was not triumph. Triumph is for competitions, and I had not been competing. It was not satisfaction exactly, though something in the vicinity of it. It was closer to the feeling I sometimes had when a build came together correctly, when the thing you had been working toward resolved into the shape you had intended, when the structure that had been invisible became suddenly completely visible. It was the feeling of recognition, of a thing being seen that had always been there. She had been mopping my floors. Yes, I thought. She had. And now she knew it. I heard Marcus's voice again, lower, the particular register he used when he was saying something important in a way he needed her to hear. I could not make out the words. I did not need to. Then I heard footsteps. Coming toward the porch. The door opened. Vanessa stood in the doorway of the house I had built, in the morning light I had specified, on the threshold I had designed to be wide enough for 2 people to stand in comfortably, and she looked at me. I looked back. She was composed. Whatever had happened in the past 40 minutes, she had assembled herself into composure. I respected that, in the removed way that I could respect a quality in a person independently of the person themselves. She said, "May I sit down?" "It's your porch," I said. She sat in Marcus's chair. She looked at the yard for a moment. The trees. "I attended the HOA meeting this morning," she said. "I know," I said. "A letter went out from your company," she said, "addressing the management issues." Everyone got it. I know, I said. She was quiet. Then, some people at the meeting recognized the name. Thibodaux. They said your company built the whole development. That's correct, I said. She looked at the trees. Her hands were in her lap, very still, and I noticed that her posture had changed from every posture I had seen her use since I arrived. It was not diminished. It was reduced to essentials. The performance of it had gone, and what was left was simply a woman sitting in a chair, trying to understand the shape of what she was inside. This house, she said. I built it, I said. 11 years ago. I held it as a rental property until I gave it to Marcus. She nodded slowly. She looked at the kitchen through the glass door. The light on the counters. The kitchen, she said. I specified it, I said. Revised the original plans to get more east-facing light. She was quiet. The trees, she said. I selected them, I said. From a nursery that specializes in transplanting established specimens. They were already 30 years old when we planted them. She looked at the trees for a long moment. I let her look. I had waited 4 weeks. I could wait another minute. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the register she used with me. It was quieter and less managed, and I thought, there she is. There is the person inside the performance. I owe you an apology, she said. I said nothing. The mop, she said. The way I've had you, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. But I should have, she stopped. Started again. I made assumptions. About who you were. I don't even know if I realized I was doing it. People rarely do, I said. That's not an excuse, she said. No, I said. It isn't. She looked at her hands. She's just here, I thought, without saying it. The words she had used on the phone with her mother. She's just here. I have been many things in my life, I said. I have been underestimated more times than I can count. By men who didn't expect a woman to be in the room. By people who saw my face before they saw my work. By institutions that required me to prove myself 3 times before they believed me once. I have managed all of it. I have never needed anyone to be apologized to on my behalf. But I will tell you something, Vanessa. She looked at me. The thing that is worth apologizing for, I said, is not that you didn't know what I built. I kept that private. That's on me to some extent. The thing that is worth apologizing for is that you looked at a woman you didn't know and decided before you knew anything what she was worth and what she was for. She absorbed this without looking away, which I noted. Yes, she said. You're right. We were quiet for a moment. I have not spent my life needing to be recognized, I said. I have spent it building things. Some of those things are visible. Some of them are not. This house is one of the visible ones. But the work that matters most is always the invisible kind. The load-bearing kind. The kind that holds everything else up. I looked at her. She was listening in a way she had not listened to me in the 4 weeks I had been here, which was completely. Marcus loves you, I said. He has made a life with you. That means you are my family. And I want to be family to you in a real way, not a managed one. Not a house guest to be scheduled. Not the woman in the small room. She blinked. Just once. Something in her face shifted in a way that I thought was going to take some time to become clear, to both of us. I want that too, she said. And her voice, for the first time, was not any of the registers she deployed for situations. It was simply her voice. Good, I said. I looked at my trees. She looked at my trees. Marcus appeared in the doorway then, reading us both with the particular skill of a man who has grown up watching a woman navigate rooms. Lunch, he said. I stood up from the impractical chair. I'll make it, I said. Vanessa stood too. Let me help, she said. We went inside together, into the kitchen I had built, in the house I had made, in the morning light I had specified, and we began. The lunch we made together that day was not remarkable in the way that stories sometimes need their turning points to be remarkable. There was no grand gesture, no tearful embrace, no moment that would have played well in the kind of story where everything resolves cleanly and completely in a single afternoon. What there was instead was simpler and more true. 2 women standing in a kitchen working beside each other, learning the particular rhythm of sharing a space without one of them disappearing into it. Vanessa did not know how to dice an onion. She had been cutting them in the inefficient way of someone self-taught, quartering them roughly and hoping the pieces would be close enough. I showed her. Not in the way of someone demonstrating superiority with the flat palm with the horizontal cuts first, with the particular motion of the knife that Raymond had taught me 30 years ago when we were young and just married and neither of us knew how to cook well, but both of us were willing to learn. She watched and then she tried and then she got it, and there was a moment of small genuine satisfaction on her face that I recognized as the face of someone learning something real. I noted it. This time warmly. Marcus sat at the kitchen table and watched us and said very little, which was the right thing to do. He understood, as he had always understood things when he let himself, that some processes require witness rather than participation. We ate at the table, all three of us. The conversation was not yet easy would take time, and I was not in the business of rushing cures, but it was honest in a way it had not been before, and honesty was the foundation. Everything else was detail and time. After lunch Marcus took a call and Vanessa and I sat for a few minutes at the table with our coffee, and she said, "How long did it take you to build all of it?" 31 years, I said. From nothing? She said. From very close to nothing, I said. Raymond and I had the truck and the license and some savings and the absolute certainty that we could do it if we worked hard enough. The certainty turned out to be the most important thing. She looked at her coffee cup. "I've been in my career for 9 years, she said. I work very hard. I believe you, I said. And I meant it. Whatever else Vanessa was, she was not lazy. I had seen her work calls and her early mornings and the particular tension she carried that was the tension of someone who is always measuring themselves against an expectation they have set unreasonably high. I said, "What are you building? In your work? What's the thing you're working toward?" She looked up, slightly surprised, as though the question were not one she had been asked directly before. "I want to run my own division," she said. "Eventually. I want to be the one making the decisions, not implementing someone else's." "That sounds familiar," I said. She almost smiled. "Almost. What does it require?" I asked. She talked then about her work, a field I did not know well, financial services, but the architecture of ambition is the same in any field, and I listen the way I listen to people who are trying to build something and are not yet certain of their materials. She was smart. She had a clear sense of what she wanted and a reasonable sense of how to get there. And the main thing standing between her and the thing she wanted, as far as I could tell from 20 minutes of listening, was the particular impatience of someone who has done everything right and cannot understand why it is taking so long. "I know what that feels like," I said when she had finished. "Do you?" She said, not unkindly but genuinely. I said, "The second bank I went to for a business loan looked at my application for 6 minutes before telling me they didn't currently have products that suited my situation." 6 minutes. I had spent 3 months preparing that application. I went home and I rewrote it and I went back to a third bank and I brought Raymond with me because I had learned that his presence produced a different outcome than mine alone, which was humiliating in a way I have never fully named, and they approved it. She was very still. "I finished the first project with that loan," I said. "Paid it back ahead of schedule. The next loan I went to the same bank and asked for 3 times as much. They approved it in 20 minutes. The numbers made the conversation they had refused to have before." She nodded. "Numbers matter," I said. "But they only get to speak after you've kept going long enough to produce them." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I owe you more than an apology for the mop." I looked at her. I want to tell you what I saw in her face in that moment because it matters for what came after. I saw a woman who was genuinely, if uncomfortably, revising. Not performing revision, not doing the social work of appearing to change, actually doing the harder and quieter work of looking at something she had done and finding it wrong. That is not nothing. Most people do not do it. Most people find an explanation that preserves the original picture. Vanessa was not doing that. I had been in enough rooms with enough people to know the difference. The mop, I said, was information. For me, not about you. It told me what you were working with in terms of what you understood about the situation. I was not insulted. I was informed. She looked at me carefully. "You were gathering evidence," she said. "I was building a foundation," I said. "The way I always do." She was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. A loosening, a kind of careful opening. And she said, "What are you going to do with it?" I looked at her steadily. I said, "I haven't decided everything yet. But I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to use what I know as a weapon. That is not how I build things." She held my gaze. "What I am going to do," I said, "is be honest with both of you about what I have and what I intend. And what I intend is to stay involved in this family's life in a real way. Not as a house guest to be managed. As Marcus's mother. As, if you're willing, something like family to you. She looked at her hands on the table. Her composure was still assembled, but it was assembled differently now. Not as a defense but as something more like form, the shape that holds what is genuine rather than what is performed. I would like that, she said. And it was quiet and it was real and it was enough. Marcus came back then, his call finished, and he read the room as he always did, and he sat down and poured himself the last of the coffee and said, "Are we okay?" "We're beginning," I said. He looked at Vanessa. She nodded. He reached across the table and put his hand briefly on my arm, and then on her hand, and that was the three of us in the kitchen I had built at the table that had come from the architectural salvage place on Peachtree, and outside the November yard held the shape of the afternoon, and the trees were bare now but magnificent in their structure, the way things that have shed what is temporary always are. The last 2 weeks of my stay were different. Not transformed, I want to resist that word because it suggests a completeness that was not yet real and might never be fully real, because human arrangements do not transform like plots, they shift incrementally, and the shift is the thing. But different. Meaningfully different. Vanessa did not hand me a mop again. She did not leave implied task lists in the form of casual mention. When I cooked, which I continued to do because I enjoy cooking and because it had become, over the 6 weeks, one of the ways I occupied the mornings productively, she sometimes cooked alongside me and we talked, and the conversation was not yet easy but it was increasingly real. She asked me questions. This surprised me at first, and then it did not because it was consistent with what I had observed in her. She was a person who, once she decided something was worth understanding, brought the full force of her attention to understanding it. She asked about the early years of the company. She asked about specific challenges and how I had navigated them. She asked about Raymond in a way that was careful and respectful, as though she understood she was asking about something tender. I told her about the early years, the cold sites and the schedule pressure and the subcontractor who had tried to walk off a job on a Tuesday and been back by Thursday because I had made clear, without raising my voice, that walking off without cause had consequences he had not fully considered. I told her about the project that had gone wrong, a foundation issue on a commercial build 3rd year in, that had cost us 6 months and more money than I like to remember, and what I had learned from it, which was that the thing you think is catastrophic is almost never the end of the story unless you decide it is. I told her about Raymond, how he managed the books and the people and the particular administrative machinery of the company with a warmth and precision I had never fully replicated and had stopped trying to replicate, understanding that some things are irreplaceable and the right response is to work around the absence rather than pretend you can fill it. She listened. All of it. And occasionally she said things that told me something about who she was below the performance, about the person who had been there all along and who I had not had access to because she had not offered it. She told me about her own mother's expectations, which were considerable and specific and had shaped Vanessa into someone who always needed to appear to be managing, because appearing to manage was the only currency her mother had taught her to trust. She told me about the years before Marcus, the years of proving herself in rooms that were skeptical of her in ways she could name and ways she could not, and how she had learned to take up space by becoming very efficient at it, which was effective but exhausting. She did not say, "That's why I handed you a mop." She did not make that connection explicitly. But I made it, and I held it carefully, the way I hold all the information that is offered to me without full awareness of what it explains. None of this absolved the mop. I want to be honest about that. Understanding why a person does a thing is not the same as deciding the thing was acceptable. But it is useful, in the way that understanding the composition of a material is useful before you decide what to build with it. Vanessa was, I was concluding, good material. Improperly applied, poorly informed about its own properties, but fundamentally sound. There was one more conversation that happened before I left. I want to tell you about it because it is the one that mattered most, and not in the way you might expect. It was a Sunday evening, the night before I was to drive back to Baton Rouge, and Marcus and Vanessa were both home and the house had the particular settled quality of a Sunday evening, that specific domestic peace that descends when the week ahead has not yet arrived and the week behind is far enough. We were in the living room, the three of us, and Marcus was reading something on his phone and Vanessa was working through a document on her laptop, and I was on the sectional sofa with a novel I had not managed to read a word of because I was thinking. I was thinking about what came next. Not for me. I knew what came next for me, the drive home, the return to my routines and my work in Beverly and Delia and the steady productive rhythm of my actual life. I was thinking about what came next for this house and the people in it. I was thinking about what I had built and what I had not yet decided. Marcus looked up from his phone at some point and found me not reading and said, "What are you thinking about?" He had asked me this question his whole life, and my answer had always been some version of the truth, because I had made a rule early in motherhood that I would not perform ease at him, that if I was worried I would say I was thinking, that if something was heavy I would say it was heavy. Not the full weight of it, some things are for adults and not for children, but the acknowledgement that things had weight. "I'm thinking about what I want to tell you both," I said. Vanessa looked up from her laptop. I said, "I want to talk about the business, what it is and what it means and what I intend with it." Marcus sat up. I said, "I have been private about this for a long time and I've told you why. But private is not the same as absent, and I think I've let the privacy become a kind of absence that wasn't useful for anyone. So I want to be clear." They were both very still. "Thibodaux Construction and Property Development is a healthy company," I said. "It has been profitable for 23 of its 31 years. It employs people I am proud to employ and does work I am proud of. I intend to continue running it for as long as I am capable of doing so well, which I expect to be a considerable time. I am not planning to retire in any conventional sense." Marcus nodded. "The company will become more complex to manage as I get older," I said. "Not because I will be incapable, but because certain decisions benefit from being made in relationship rather than in isolation. I have Gerald. I have Delia. And I would like eventually to have family more involved. Not now. The relationships need more time. But eventually." I looked at Marcus when I said this. He looked back. "I also want to say something about this house," I said. Vanessa's hand stilled on her keyboard. "I gave it freely," I said. "I gave it without conditions and I do not intend to revisit the giving. It is yours. Both of yours. I want to be clear about that." She exhaled something she had apparently been holding. "But I want to tell you what this house is," I said. "Not as a lesson. Just as something you deserve to know." And I told them. I told them about the planning and the specification work. I told them about the morning light and the east-facing windows and why I had insisted on more glass. I told them about the landscape architect and the specimen trees and the nursery that specialized in giving old things new places to grow. I told them about the day I walked the foundation perimeter in my work boots with the site foreman, checking the measurements knowing this one was the one. I told them about Raymond standing in the framed-out kitchen doorway on a Saturday afternoon and saying, "Lorraine, you built something beautiful again." When I finished, the room was quiet. Then Marcus said, "You were saving this house for me before you even knew Vanessa existed." "I was keeping it," I said. "For the right moment." He nodded. He looked at the room around him and I could see him looking at it differently now, the way you look at something once you know its history. Vanessa said quietly, "I've been calling it our house." "It is your house," I said. "I've been calling it that without knowing what it cost you to make it." "Not cost," I said. "Invest. There's a difference. Cost implies loss. Invest implies intention." She looked at me for a long moment. I had learned in 6 weeks what her different silences meant, and this one meant she was choosing her words carefully because the thing she wanted to say mattered to her. She said, "I want to learn about it. The house. What went into it. If you're willing to show me." "I'm willing," I said. "Good," she said. She paused. "And I want to apologize again and more specifically than I did before. Not just for the mop. For deciding what you were before I knew you. For putting you in the smallest room. For talking about you to my mother the way I did, which you probably heard through these excellent walls you specified." That surprised a sound out of me that was close to a laugh. She was watching me with something that was, for the first time in 6 weeks, fully direct. "These walls carry sound remarkably well," I said. "I imagine you knew they would," she said. "I had a sense," I said. That was when she smiled. A real smile, not the adequate one, not the polished social one. Something genuine and slightly rueful and human. Marcus laughed. A full released laugh, the kind I had not heard from him in weeks. The room settled into something that was not yet ease but was the honest precursor to it. I drove home the next morning. Marcus carried my suitcase to the car, which he had always done and which I had always let him do because there are gifts you give your children by receiving gracefully. Vanessa came to the door. She was not yet someone who would come to the car. That would come later with time, and it did. But she came to the door and she said, "Drive carefully, Lorraine," and it was the first time she had said my name in 6 weeks without the particular flatness of someone performing adequacy. It sounded different. I drove home through the November morning, Georgia giving way to Alabama, giving way to Mississippi, giving way to Louisiana, and the landscape changed around me the way landscapes do when you are returning to something that fits the particular shape of who you are. And I drove with the window slightly open even though it was cold because I have always thought better with cold air. I thought about what I was returning to and what I was leaving and what the difference between those two things would become over time. I thought about Raymond, who had always said I told stories from the bottom up. He was right that I did. He was usually right. But what he had also known, what he had always known about me, was that the stories I told from the bottom up were not just stories. They were structures. They were things that would stand after the telling. I thought about what I had built in the 6 weeks I had spent in the house I made. Not the foundation I had built that before I arrived. Over 31 years, every specification and revision and load-bearing decision that held everything visible in place. Not the structure that had been there, patient, waiting to become legible. What I had built in 6 weeks was something smaller and more particular and in some ways more important than either of those things. I had built a relationship. Or the beginning of one. The kind that is made from honesty rather than performance, from the willingness to be seen rather than the insistence on being managed, from the specific courage it takes to say, I did not know, and now I do, and I am willing to revise. That is a rare kind of building. It requires materials that most people find difficult to sustain. Patience, observation, the restraint to let a thing develop in its proper sequence rather than forcing it toward a conclusion before the foundation is ready to bear the weight. I had waited. I had observed. I had been handed a wet mop in my own kitchen and I had mopped the floor and I had gone to the porch and sat with my trees and begun building from the bottom, load-bearing before visible, and I had trusted the process the way I had trusted it for 31 years. The drive home was 4 hours. I stopped once for coffee and the kind of gas station lunch that Raymond would have disapproved of with elaborate theatrical gestures that were really a form of affection. I ate it in the parking lot and watched the people coming and going and thought about nothing in particular, which is its own kind of useful. I got home in the early afternoon. Beverly was on her porch and saw my car and raised her hand and I raised mine. Home. I carried my own suitcase. I went inside. The house smelled of itself. The particular combination of old wood and the candle I had left burning on the timer and the garden outside the kitchen window that even in November held the ghost of its summer self. I moved through the rooms the way you move through a place that knows you, that has absorbed your specific weight and rhythm and arranged itself accordingly. I put the kettle on. I called Delia. I'm home, I said. How was it? She said. Productive, I said. In the ways that matter. She paused. Should I ask? Not yet, I said. Soon. She said, the Willowmere situation is fully resolved. New site manager started Monday. No further complaints from owners. Good, I said. And Gerald called, she said. He has some thoughts on the land parcels in the northern corridor you've been watching. He thinks 2 of them may be ready to move on. I said, set up a call for Thursday. Done, she said. And Lorraine? Welcome home. I said, thank you, Delia. I made my tea. I took it to the back garden, which is smaller than the Willowmere yard but mine in the way that everything you have lived with longest is most profoundly yours, and I sat and I thought about the land parcels in the northern corridor and what they might become and how long it would take and what the sequence of decisions would need to be. I thought about what I was going to build next. 3 weeks after I returned to Baton Rouge, Vanessa called me. Not Marcus, Vanessa. On a Tuesday afternoon, a time I associated with her being in the office and not available, and she called from her desk. I could tell by the particular background quality of the sound. She said, I have a question about something work-related if you have a few minutes. I said, I have time. She had been thinking, she said, about her division. The one she wanted to run eventually. She had been thinking about the structure of it, how to position herself, how to demonstrate not just competence but strategic vision, the thing that distinguishes someone who executes from someone who leads. She had been thinking about how to make the case. She wanted to know how I had made the case for my own company, when the work was still new and the proof was still limited, how I had gotten people to believe in something before the numbers were undeniable. I thought about this for a moment. I thought about the early years and the banks and the cold sites and the subcontractor who had tried to walk and come back by Thursday. I said, I stopped trying to make them believe in something before the numbers existed. I decided the numbers had to come first. I focused everything on making the numbers undeniable as fast as possible, and then I let the numbers make the case. She was quiet. I said, the mistake most people make is thinking belief is the prerequisite for proof. It's not. Proof is the prerequisite for belief in the rooms where it matters. You don't convince those rooms. You bring them evidence they cannot dispute, she said, and in the meantime, while you're building the evidence. In the meantime, I said, you build quietly. You do the work that will become the proof, and you do it without requiring anyone to see it yet. The visibility comes when the foundation is ready. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you were doing that when you were here. The whole time. You were building while we thought you were. She stopped. While you thought I was just here, I said. Yes, she said. I said, I have been building my whole life. Some of it is visible. Most of it is not. The visible part is only possible because of the part underneath. She said, I understand that differently now than I would have 6 weeks ago. I know, I said. Another silence. The good kind. She said, Lorraine, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me honestly if it's too soon or not appropriate. Ask, I said. Would you be willing to have lunch? When we're in Baton Rouge at Christmas. Just us. I think I'd like to keep talking. I said I would like that very much. And she said, good, and I could hear in the single word that she meant it. We said goodbye and I put the phone down and I sat for a moment in the particular quiet of my office, which is where I had been when she called, where I do the thinking work with the yellow legal pad, where Raymond's photograph is on the shelf in the frame with the small chip in the lower left corner that I have never had repaired because the chip was there the day he gave it to me and removing it would be removing something true. I looked at his photograph. I said, to him or to the office or to the air that holds the things we say when we say them to people who are no longer there to hear. I think I'm getting somewhere. The photograph did not answer. It never does. But the light in the room shifted slightly, the afternoon moving through the west-facing window the way it always does at this hour. And I have been in enough buildings I have made to know that light is the most honest thing. It goes where the openings allow it. It illuminates what is actually there. It does not perform. There is a thing I want to tell you now that the story is nearly done, that I could not have told you at the beginning because you needed to understand everything that came before it. I did not go to Atlanta to teach Vanessa a lesson. I did not go there to reveal myself dramatically or to engineer a reckoning or to do any of the things that the simplest version of this story might suggest I was doing. I went because my son asked me, and because some part of me, the part one do not always admit to, needed what I had told myself I did not need, which was to be in the presence of family. To be near the people who are mine in the most basic and irreducible way, even when the being near is complicated. I got more than I came for. I usually do. That is not because I am clever, though I am. Raymond always said I should be allowed to say that, and I have decided he was right. It is because I pay attention and I am patient and I trust the process, which is the same process whether I am building a house or a company or a relationship or a version of understanding between two women who started from a very different place than where they ended up. You begin from the foundation. Load-bearing before visible. You do not rush the cure. You let the structure find its own moment to become what it is. That has been my practice for 67 years. I expect it will be my practice for whatever comes after. The house at 4412 Willowmere Drive is still standing. I drove past it on my way through Atlanta in February, not stopping, just passing, the way you pass something that is finished and belongs to someone else now and is exactly what you intended it to be. The 30-year-old trees in the backyard were bare and enormous against the February sky, magnificent in their structure, the way things that have shed what is temporary always are. I drove on. There is always more to build. Megaphone, thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.